Welcome, everyone. Today, I have the great pleasure to be here with Keegan Lee. She's a highly motivated teenager, and she's a mental health activist, a digital wellness mentor, author. She's a founder of a global mental health campaign. She has her own mental health podcast. She writes articles. She's an athlete. She's a cross country runner and also track runner, correct?
Hmm.
So it's a very busy teenager. How old are you?
I'm 18.
18. Wow, man. What is it like to be Keegan Lee? To be 18 and to like have all this different interests and being so well spoken and put out so much content out to the world. What is it like to be you?
Well, and I appreciate that. I am really just an 18-year-old girl who's passionately curious about these these causes like digital wellness and mental health, and I see the issue, and I want to do everything I can to leave a legacy in this world and leave a mark. Um, I love people. I love learning. I'm a big advocate for education, and so it helps me. It gives me a sense of fulfillment when I can see that I'm helping others and that other people are benefiting from me. And I think that in this day and age, youth leadership is very important and very prominent. And so my goal is that I can help kind of create this domino effect among youth voices and allow them to gain the courage and vulnerability to make a change as well.
Yes, courage is contagious. Courage is
Hmm.
definitely contagious, and you're definitely a young woman on a mission, right?
Yes, I am on a mission. Yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in mental health? Like, how did that came about?
Yes, so it really started in the midst of the pandemic when I noticed my own mental health start to decline because for a number of reasons. We were all in a state of social isolation, and we were limited to so many of our day-to-day activities. And so um, I found that I instantly gravitated toward my phone. And so I became obsessed with this metaverse, this universe of the online world. And I believed that if I were to constantly engage with social media platforms, that my social life would be consistently amplified. And so eventually it became this obsessive compulsive behavior that was a barrier in my relationships with others, my relationship with myself, my goals, my aspirations. And so, if there's one good thing that came out of the pandemic for me, it's that it gave me the self awareness that I needed to understand that this is a problem and it's not just individual. It's universal, this issue with social media obsession and social media's effect on mental health.
Yeah, it's not just for youth, right? But it's, the
Right.
parents, right? You see, like,
Yes.
we're all addicted. It's an addiction, right?
Hmm.
Addicted to the phones in so many ways. And sometimes you see parents with their kids and a stroller and stuff, and the kids crying and beating for attention. It's called beating for attention, and the
Yes.
parents is actually on the phone, irritated that the kid is wants to connect, basically.
Hmm.
So that's creating attachment issues that are like serious, is like borderline neglect, and that's like
Hmm.
childhood abuse. Like, so it could it's not very far fetched that there's going to be like long term consequences for mental health for these children to not be able to, feel secure in relationships because of the social media obsession, right?
Yes, absolutely. And parents are they play such an important role, and they really are the primary determinant as to how a child uses technology.
Mhm.
And because there is no law as to when a child gets a phone, parents really determine that, and they can create boundaries. They can create ways to make their home more digitally responsible.
Yeah, with parenting, it's really tricky because you can create rules, but if you're not actually living up to the rules, if you're not demonstrating by example what you're doing on a
Mhm.
day-to-day basis, that's what the kids are learning, they're observing. You can tell them rules, enforce the rules, but if what you're doing is in opposition to what you're saying, what you're teaching them is to do what you do.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Observational learning does not stop in the earliest stages of a child's life. It continues throughout the lifespan, and um, especially, in the most pivotal moments of our childhood, we need to be consistently having conversation. We need to be interacting in our most primitive ways, like physical interaction, making eye contact, making inferences about social cues and body language, and learning all of these things. And so it's really about reclaiming conversation in the household, in the school system, with any primary agent of socialization, because people, especially in my generation, we're losing the art of this human touch. And it's 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 concerning because of how comforting technology is, because we have this great sense of control on the platforms, and so that's I call it the talking cure. It's really about conversation and reclaiming this sense of of humanity.
Yes, and I find it that's, concerning that when we speak of mental health, there's still a lot of stigma around the topic,
Yeah.
but there's no stigma around being, obsessed and addicted to the phone, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why can't we just normalize mental health and seeing a therapist and seeking it, some level of self awareness development, self knowing, personal development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why isn't mental health like just as prevalent as going in having like a medical checkup?
Mm-hmm.
How is it any different? And then why aren't we promoting this? And even in the schools, like every school has a counseling department, but what percentage, I wonder, what percentage of the actual students actually utilize it, right? And why? And why
Mm-hmm.
are we promoting that within the schools? Why aren't we promoting that in social media? Why are we promoting mental health is cool again? Like what?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very good question, and that's definitely a signal that there's room for improvement.
Mhm.
Um, Mental health is just as important as physical health, and there's so much of our mental well-being that is interconnected with our physical well-being, and vice versa, um, and so I think a lot of it has to do with we're just oblivious. Number one, we're oblivious that there aren't enough resources, because we see so many people who demonstrate happiness, that they, but that people are happy. We see people talking, having conversations. We forget that there is such thing as putting on a mask and shielding. And then there's that idea that we are all actors on a stage, and we see it's like climate change. We see so many good days, we forget about that there that our glaciers are melting, and so that's why I think it really comes down to self-reflection, which is being lost as well because of the convenience of technology. We need to be constantly stimulated, satisfied, gratified by this digital affirmation. And it's scary. It's really scary, because we need that time to think for ourselves, for self awareness, for um, to really feel and find who we are, because if we don't know who we are, then we are not socially equipped to connect with others.
Exactly. Self-knowing starts there. Know thyself, right?
Mhm.
Absolutely. So sort of the existential psychologist in you.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's coming out. um, no, that's beautiful. You know, you're studying psychology. I'm also like a grad student in psychology in my last year.
Mm.
I'm working with clients. I've been a life coach, a hypnotherapist for a long time. I'm also writing my book. I find it fascinating
Wow.
that you actually already put out your book. It's like giving birth. You know what I mean? It's such
Mm.
a major undertaking. I'm very impressed by that, and in my own struggles of making time to write my book and all that.
It's so
But
hard.
right, like how did you get around to making it happen? Like maybe you just turned out the social media. Is that what made it work?
Yeah, yeah, and I really want people to understand that I am not anti-social media.
Mm.
I use social media, as you know, I have social media. I think it has evolved our world in incredible ways. It has saved lives. But we cannot be naive to see the flip side of that coin. Um, so everything in moderation, and I had become consumed by this negative side of social media because I was number one addicted to it, and I was constantly engaging in comparison and comparing myself to the highlight reels of other people's lives. And so, how the whole entire book started was I wanted to do a New Year's resolution, and I said I'm going to delete social media for a month. Um, and I did, and then at the end of that month, I was like, "Wow, this is really I'm experiencing something really beautiful right now." And so I decided to go for another month, and so that's why the book is called 60 Days, is because I deleted social media for 60 days, and during that time, I journaled my everyday thoughts and feelings and emotions, and I collaborated with a professor of psychology at Elon University, and he responded to my journal entries in a psychological way to help me understand the why behind my behaviors and thoughts, and why I was having automatic responses toward my phone, and why I was having periods of withdrawal. And so he was really instrumental in the entire process because he offered that sense of expertise and professionalism that allowed me to gain a lot of introspection.
That's wonderful. And how did you get acquainted with what's his name, Doctor
Gandor.
Gandor? I didn't know the pronounce his name.
Yeah, we did not know each other. I was doing a quick little Google search because I knew that I wanted a professional to help me explain what was happening. And he specialized in adolescence and adolescent anxiety, social media use. And so I was like, perfect. And so we set up a Zoom call, and it was very informal. We were just talking about social media and this digital world that we live in. And after 2 months of the cleanse that I did, I was reflecting on my journal entries, and I was like, this could make a difference. My story could make a difference. Dr. Gandor and his scientific perspective could make a difference, and that together could be really powerful. And so the initial idea was to never write a book. That was never the end goal. Um, but I talked to him about it, and I said, "Would you be open to writing this with me?" And of course, I was very innocent. I mean, he's a full-time professor. He's a clinical psychologist. He's very busy, and he was like, "Yes." He was very enthusiastic because he was like, "This is part of the work that I do," and and so it was about a 2.5 year process, which is quite fast in my opinion, for a book. But the writing, was off and on, but then the publishing process was pretty rapid, I would say. So that was yes, it was quite the journey.
Wow, so 2.5 years ago, so you were like what, 15?
I was 16. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's much needed. And what have you learned about um, taking a break from social media? What was like the main gains, and how would you recommend that to people?
So there were so many things that I gained from the experience. Just to name a few of the less bolder ones. I was more creative. I had a longer attention span. I could think more clearly. Um, but the biggest thing that I found was number one, found the true meaning of human connection, which is being physically together without the barrier of a screen where I can see you, I can read your facial expressions, I can read your body language, I can engage in one of the most sensitive and vulnerable acts, which is human touch, you know? And so that was very, very pivotal. And then number two is I gained this greater tolerance for boredom. So I could just live and be and be in the present moment without feeling compelled to constantly post online or check my phone or constantly be on alert for um, a notification or a like or a comment. I could enjoy life and this enjoy it at a very slow pace, and that was really comforting and just magical to have experienced that, especially in a world where everything is constantly stimulating and on the go. So I could be bored and I loved it.
Yeah, this it sounds like there's a lot for you that you gained from it. But what is the fear of what you might lose, right? What is
Mm,
it that stops us, that keeps us like, sometimes we may feel like, okay, I'm done with it. I'm not gonna do this anymore. But it's still we keep doing it for some
mm.
fear of what losing something, right?
Yes. We keep doing it because we're afraid that we're going to miss out.
Hmm.
We're afraid that we're going to be lost on information about other people's lives. We want to constantly engage in social media because that's what everybody else does. It has to do with this sense of conformity and satisfaction, always being satisfied. And a lot of that has to do with, I'm sure you know, the neurotransmitter hormone dopamine, which plays such a large role on social media and is responsible for keeping us alert and constantly on the go for more and more and more and more until suddenly we just have gotten so much stimulation that we just don't feel content anymore. But yet we feel like we have to go back to it to receive that social gratification, that sense of contentment. But that's not natural, and that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Right, it's an overstimulation, right? So there's a cost. There's a cost for sure. And when we when we are addicted to social media and doing that, there's like actual like consequences to our neurology, right?
Yes,
Constant
yes.
stimulation. I think I saw some pictures of you speaking in several places and talking to people and explaining what
Mhm.
happens, maybe inside of our brain.
Yes, yes. There's so much. It literally changes the neurobiology and chemistry of our brain.
Mm.
And I love talking about your brain on social media. It's one of my favorite things, and I could go on and on and on, so you might have to stop me. But one of the main things that happens is when we are on our screens, we are experiencing this release of cortisol, which is our stress hormone. And so oftentimes when we're on social media, we are experiencing this stress this stress response, and oftentimes it is a physical response. And so blood flow is literally rerouted from the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain related to rational thinking and decision making, and it reroutes the blood to areas of the body responsible for maintaining our most essential bodily functions like our heart and our lungs. And so our bodies are literally in this fight or flight mode, which allows us to constantly be on alert for notifications and everything that's happening on social media. And so that's cortisol. Cortisol plays a role. The other big hormone is dopamine. And what people don't understand about dopamine is that it is one of the most powerful motivators for human behavior. It is one of those things that literally can make us get up and do anything that is dopamine related. And what we know about dopamine is that typically things that require a lot of effort, like exercise or having a conversation, have the most prolonged and sustained dopamine effect. And those those ways of gaining that natural dopamine, that's natural. But when we go on social media and scroll on TikTok or smoke a cigarette or do cocaine, um, it's the dopamine effect is very short-lived because it requires no effort. And so the important thing to understand that is that when we're on social media, dopamine the amount of dopamine we receive has to do with our dopamine level before we got on Instagram. So if I'm on Instagram, I see a picture that I like, I get an instant dopamine hit. But the level of dopamine that I receive from that image has to do with how much dopamine I had at my baseline level of dopamine before that. So everyone has a baseline level of dopamine that our body wants to try to maintain and optimize for survival. And every time you go on Instagram and you see a picture that you like, that increases. But if I scroll down a little bit more on my feed and see a picture that I maybe not like, um, it might have been different if that was the first picture that I saw. I might have experienced a higher amount of dopamine because my dopamine levels have become accustomed to seeing those things. And so dopamine is extremely powerful and it's extremely repetitive, and uh, it's important that people understand this process, this neurobiological process of dopamine, so that you can modulate your own dopamine release in healthy ways.
Yeah, there's like a book called The Dopamine Detox or something
Yeah.
like that, right? Um, yeah, to withdraw. It's really to protect your senses, right? Protect your senses.
Yes.
It's like a mental diet, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think about in terms of, food diets and things like that to maintain some kind of level of health, physical health. But what about a mental diet or emotional diet? Because also all those, there are pictures that you like, it might give you a hit, but what is all the stuff that you don't like? Right? It gives
Mm-hmm.
you even like more of a reactivity. It's like, I don't like this person said that, or what if it's, and then there's bullying. Like
Mm-hmm.
like for teenagers, that's more like it's more prevalent that
Mm-hmm.
kids will attack, or they'll create different names and like different profiles, and if they don't like, they kind of gang up and like can target a certain person, and they don't think anything out of it. They think it's like, it's just, just like, not talking to somebody in high school, but just doing that online somehow, like it's just so painful. It drives a lot of their of kids and a lot of girls to kill themselves.
Yes,
This is
it
very
does.
serious right now.
Yes, very much so. And a lot of that has to do with this absence of of human. We forget that when we are talking through a screen, this message is going to an actual breathing, alive human being. And so what we're seeing is that, even though bullying happens a lot online, we are seeing that a lot of our online interaction is being translated to our in-person communication. And so I talk about this in my book, Social Media's Effect on Emotional Intelligence, and how we are seeing, when we are talking in person, we're seeing a lot more aggression, short responses, this lack of empathy. And that's what we're seeing when we're communicating online as well. You know, we on Twitter, there's that word limit where you have to make sure your thoughts and your communication is succinct. And so that may limit some of the dialogue that you want to present, which could cause some problems if other people are misinterpreting it or something like that. But the important thing to know about digital communication and in-person communication is that we can edit our responses on social media and texting. We can filter. We can manipulate. We have full control,
Mm.
and that's why we're losing the art of being together, because it takes effort. And in a book that I'm reading called Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle, um, she says that the number one reason why people don't like in person conversation is because it takes effort and it happens in real time. And online, we can think about our responses, we can think about how this message may come across, but then again, we don't always think about that because of the screen. And so that's why bullying, to go back to that topic, that's why it happens so often, and it's terrible. It's terrible.
Yeah, it's everywhere. And I also study a lot about trauma,
Mm,
like childhood trauma and just trauma in general, PTSD, complex trauma. And what I see is almost like, the trauma of social media.
yes.
Because, what is trauma? Mental health trauma would be like something that is too overwhelming, that's too much more than you can handle, right?
Mhm.
And it's like you can't deal with it right there and then you store it for later, and then it is an accumulation, and then social media just keeps coming back. It's not like a one time only trauma, that it's done and it was and it's over with, but it's this continuous bombardment, right, of
Yeah.
information, of opinions, of conflict, of like comparison, of less than, of missing out and not being good enough, over and over and over and over. So what
Yes.
is that doing? I think that is, like you said, the fight or flight, right?
Mhm.
It's being activated.
Mhm.
So
Absolutely.
with that, it's like too much for your nervous system to process at any given time. It continues to accumulate, and then you're constant in this kind of reactivity, like my phone just buzzed, like I'm looking,
Mhm.
like, it looks like a lot like PTSD, like a bomb went off, but it's all these mini bombs, on your phone.
Right.
So I can kind of see a correlation between, and I never heard that said anywhere else or like talked about in this way, like the trauma of social media, how that is creating some kind of traumatic, like consequence in our nervous system, right?
Yes, absolutely. Um, and to add to that, I think that people who do have this sense of trauma from social media, um, they're not dealing with it in the correct way. And in fact, they may go back to social media to kind of cope and cover up the true emotions that they're feeling, because it is so stimulating and because it does have the power to override our own rational thoughts.
Mhm.
And so it's it can be very traumatic, and it's scary because we when we do that, if someone is does experience trauma from social media or any negative thought processing, they lose that time and that critical natural processing that it takes to truly understand how you're feeling, because they want to go back to social media uh, to to be a part of it, to be a part of that sense of gratification. And um, what I tell people is that if you cannot if in this world where we are constantly connecting and constantly overstimulating, if you do not find time to be with yourself and your thoughts and self-reflection, you will only ever know how to be alone. And on social media, we are granted three wishes. Number one, we are always heard. Number two, we are never alone. And number three, we are never bored. So, because we can always find a sense of community in person, excuse me, online, we lose this sense of what it means to be with ourselves, which then
And
is
with
important.
others.
Yes, yes. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's the lie of social media, right? That there's a lie built in there that it's like, you're more connected.
Mhm.
Very seductive lie.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, you're less connected. The
Yeah.
more social media you do, the less social media you do, you could be more connected with real people in the real world.
Mhm.
So that is the problem with social media. And also other problems, of course, are like the polarization of
Mm.
people, of thinking, of issues, and black and white thinking. That's cognitive distortions, right?
Mhm.
So things that people, like Mike Tyson said, you know, people really, what did you say? People got really used to saying things on the internet without getting like punched in the face, right?
Mhm.
Because
Right.
it's like we feel like we can be behind the keyboard and keyboard warriors and just say whatever and be harsh in a way that we would not if we were in front of the other person, if we were like, right, in
Right.
person. So
Yes.
it creates this dissociation, right?
Mhm.
It's kind of dissociating from like real emotions and things like
Mhm.
that, how to relate to others.
Yes.
And also, there's this whole cancel culture that it's like, it's social media kind of the algorithm kind of prioritizing certain things, certain topics over others, and kind of curbing how
Absolutely.
we think in kind of curbing like the narrative, like the
Mhm.
social narrative to like to who are the kings, the owners of the algorithm, like gods, right? The algorithm gods. So that's also concerning because before you know, and if especially if you don't have any level of self-awareness, of personal work, of being alone, you're not gonna know. You're gonna be thinking in a totally different way with all full of these ideas that are not even yours. They're like,
Mhm.
you know, uh, inserted there, like in between the algorithm. Everybody's sort of repeating whatever they choose to show. You don't even get to see all of your friends' stuff. You get to see some selected, number of things. Nobody, it used to be that you would see everything all the time. Now it's kind of, maybe only 10% of the people or less see what you actually post and vice versa. So
Yes.
there's a control of what you see in an experience. Who's controlling this and what for and what power do they have over your own reality? Because
Mm.
reality is subjective,
Mhm. Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Reality is not objective. Like we don't see reality as it is. We see reality as we are. So there are filters, right?
Mhm.
What are these filters that are being superimposed on social media that is actually altering how we perceive and experience reality itself? So that's very serious. It's very
Yes.
serious.
Yes, and you're right. I'm glad that you brought that up because the algorithm is very much at the core and at the root of dismantling, the fabric from which society functions. And um, it does have to do with the business model and how they want to increase our engagement and attention within platforms so
Mhm.
that they can profit and make money. And so if you are not buying anything, then you are the product, and they are buying our time and our energy. Um, and that's why when we are on social media, they're showing us what we want to see because they know that we will get psychologically trapped in that realm of our interests and what we want to see. And so it definitely is altering our real world perception, and in so many ways, in communication, in our relationship with ourselves, and how we take risks and how we initiate conversation and how we go about our daily lives. It's even, you know, during this past lockdown that we had at UNC, people were leaving the room during the lockdown to use the restroom, which at that time should not have happened, but my dad connected it to this idea of video games. Perhaps people feel comfortable doing that because video games have altered this sense of reality that we get multiple lives, you know, and that or that we are going to be okay, or that, any of this. So it's scary. It is.
Yeah. And then not to be just to lean towards just only the negative, but there's also the positive. The
Mhm.
positives. There's some positive outcomes of social media, but we cannot forget that there are many, many, many negatives, and there are serious consequences of just being unconscious, utilizing in social media, and
Mhm.
especially for little ones and for youth, and what that does in their brain and how they grow up in the world. But some positives would be that we are, here we are using social media, like, this is broadcasting, it's going to go on this social media and the other. So we can spread ideas, good ideas
Yes,
as well, right?
absolutely.
So how do we, right? How do we manage, and how do we? One thing is to say, okay, no more social media. I'm out of it, and I'm done with it. And some people are able to do that. But how do we manage, using it, but not letting it use us?
Mm, that's a good question. I think we do have to come to grips with the reality that social media is not going away. It's going to continue to evolve. Technology is going to continue to evolve. And so we have to grow with it. And we do have to learn to find the beauty of it, and use it in the right ways without becoming trapped. And so a lot of it is self-help, self-control, but then a lot of it is creating technology in a way that is humane. And so maybe creating smartphones that are intentional, and instead of creating them in a way that constantly gets our attention and constantly makes us become psychologically robotic, perhaps we can make them in a way that allows us to frequently disengage and be intentional with who we're communicating with, and for how long we're communicating with them, and what apps that we go on, and how we use those apps to our benefit, and do that in a way that's not digitally overwhelming or over consuming. And so a lot of it does come down to helping yourself, but then a lot of it does have to do with these engineers, these people who are creating these technologies, and how they can play a role in helping us.
And
Which
also,
is why
like,
the
go ahead.
no, sorry, I was just going to say, which is why this is also important that we're doing this and educating. Yeah.
Yes, yes, that's such a great point, because it's like the people that are creating these things. And also, I think in terms of, like, the legal aspects and kind of like governmental controls, and kind of guidelines for social media platforms, and for technology equipment, and just in general, to not just let it be like they have free reign over our consciousness, basically.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it comes down to, is to
Mm-hmm.
protect, like, people's mental health, because it's a very costly endeavor. Also, like, that's one way that governments look at it. It's like the cost of mental health issues and problems and things like that, right? The human cost, but also the dollar cost, the financial cost, and things like that. So there needs to be more control and more care around those issues, for sure, than what we have.
Absolutely. Yes.
And just sort of finalize and wrap it up. I think one question that parents would have is,
Mm-hmm.
like when they we try to kind of, I have kids, I have a 20-year-old, I have a 14-year-old. How do you manage, how do you control, when do you allow them, or until when do you prevent them from having this, an account, before, that it used to be Facebook, now it's Instagram, TikTok, and when my son was younger, it was like Snapchat. And the
Mhm.
streaks, he didn't want to lose the streak, and he was like crazy about the Snapchat streak. Like, what?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Streaks are, yeah. Snapchat streaks are, my goodness.
We're serious, right?
Yeah, it's such, no, it's such a, it's a great concept to increase engagement and to keep us coming back for more. Um, it is dangerous though, but to answer your question, parents are put in a very difficult position these days because they know that technology is evolving. They know that social media is a main source of communication around the world, but they're also hopefully aware of the negative effects of it. And so they're like, how do I create this balance with my child that's going to allow them to grow up maturely in this digital world, but also maintain and obtain a healthy mental well-being. And so that's where boundaries are very important. That's where role modeling, talking about digital wellness,
Mm,
main, you know, creating these digital free spaces in the home where devices are not um, shown, and listening to your children about what their needs are, why they may feel this attachment to social media, why they keep coming back to social media even though they feel like they're not really gaining anything from it. The biggest thing I would recommend for parents is for them to understand the signs of addiction
mm,
um, among the youth in regards to social media use. So this sense of anticipation, of
mm,
constantly wanting to engage, this sense of escapism, escaping the real world and going to social media as a coping mechanism. Um, Lying about how much screen time you have to conceal the amount of screen time you actually have. So understanding all of these things will help parents gain the awareness they need to know that their child may be addicted to social media, and then they can take the necessary steps that they need to combat that. Um, One of the biggest things that I believe is incredibly helpful is to not have any screens in the child's bedroom, because the screen, the blue light that comes from that, it does suppress the melatonin hormone that we need to sleep. And sleep during adolescence, during the childhood years, is critical. And so there are these places where we can have device-free moments, and those foster real conversation, real connection, without the worry or concern for digital disruption.
Where can people get a hold of you and find out more about you, engage with you, and maybe book you for speaking at their
Mhm.
school, at their different groups and organizations, right?
Yes, so Dr. Gandor and I, and Emma Lemke, who's another team member who's incredible as well, we are doing presentations around the country at different schools. And so you can find my email on my website, which is keegan-lee.com. And you can also buy the book on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it's called 60 Days of Disconnect.
Yeah, I bought the book. I read the book. It's amazing. Continue
Oh.
to, be you and be this great shining light in the world. Continue to shine, shine brighter, shine bigger, because we need more of Keegan Lee's in the world.
Oh, Thank you, Lita. Thank
Yeah, and then you
you.
give the courage and then the inspiration for others to do the same and to continue to push this forward for mental health for youth. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm gonna put the link to her website, to the book, and everything down below. I'm gonna post in all these different social medias, and then I'm gonna shut off the social media, and I'm gonna go live in the real world.
Yeah. Yes, thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.
Yes, take care. Thank you.